So, do badders, welcome to Bad Boy Running. And our next guest actually kind of popped their head up on, I think it was Runner's World or similar, just at a time when we've been talking about, with Sophie Power and a few other runners, about the difficulties in trying to ensure that the sport is as accessible to women as possible, given the obstacles into getting into the sport, the culture, but also, as still for many relationships, a primary caregiver. That creates a huge addition of problems in trying to train and get into a race. So welcome to the podcast to tell us about how they've approached differently as a race organizer, Caleb Efta and Kelsey Banaszynski. Did I get your second names right? I hadn't practiced it before, and I was just saying, God.
You did excellent. And honestly, yeah, it's more about confidence, I feel like, in saying my last name than even saying it right, because I will barely correct you. So great job.
Well, firstly, how did you two meet each other?
Oh, we have a runner's love story, really. So we're both Midwest, pretty much born and bred, moved out to Colorado on our own. And Caleb had been living in Colorado longer than me, and I stumbled upon essentially a running group that he was putting on. I had been in Colorado a year, was trying to make friends, saw some people running on the trail, and I was like, what's this? Like, seems organized. You guys do this a lot. I need some people in my life. And they're like, we meet every Tuesday. We're the Golden Mountain Runners. And I showed up the next Tuesday, and the rest is pretty much history. Kind of just...
I had a no dating policy in the running group because it was, it's a bit incestual if you all start dating each other. So I've never.
How big was the group? Because
it varied. Maybe, I mean, when we first started it was like 5 people, but now it's 60 people show up every day.
It was probably like 20 or so at the time.
Probably 30.
20 to 30 at the time. Yeah.
But she rolled up and I swooped. I broke my own roll.
Unite.
But it worked out.
You just did it.
Yep. Just did it. And then he was in the process of putting on High Lonesome. And when we started dating, and so within the first like 6-8 months, we were all of a sudden launching a business together. I kind of told him I was joining. I didn't really give him much of an option. And
I've been working on the race for almost 1.5 years at that point. And she was like, what's this? It looks cool. I want in.
And actually, we've spoken to many American runners and athletes, but we haven't spoken, I don't think, to any race organizers. In terms of, it's interesting the way you worded that, because I don't think a British race organizer would have the same structure where you said, so we went into business together to form a race. Whereas in the UK, it feels more like that people just kind of show up and start doing a race. And at some point, like, oh God, I probably need some legal protection in case I kill loads of people. But like, if you were to, when you start a race in the States, what do you actually need to do legally and would sensibly to actually get it off the ground?
Those are 2 very different questions. What do you need and what do you need sensibly are polar opposites. I mean, frankly, a lot of races start up the way you just described. They're we call them mom and pop races. They're just
grassroots, whatever. Yeah.
People are running in an area they're passionate about, and they're like, it'd be fun to have a race here. And so them and some friends pitch together and do a race, and then they do it again and again, and eventually it just kind of evolves into something. There are plenty of other people who have done what we've done as well. I think it sort of became easier with the dawn of the internet to make kind of the basics work. So you can websites and business structures and that kind of stuff. But it's really quite simple. You form a legal entity, which is $30 in the state of Colorado, and you pick a name, and then you start permitting. And that's the hardest part in the US, I think, over most places, is the permitting process is quite extensive and it's very restrictive. That's why all of our races are so small, because ours is capped at 150, and I think the biggest in the U.S.
by the land management agencies. So we don't set those caps.
And so it's sort of just you buy a bunch of shit or borrow a bunch of stuff. And can I swear on this podcast? Is that okay?
Yeah. Oh, fuck yeah.
Thank you. You buy shelters and water jugs and food and tables, and you just start putting it together.
And when I say we went into business together, really what happened was Caleb was putting this on. He didn't really fill me in on what was happening because our relationship was so new, but I was like, I think you're going to need some more hands. I'll just show up with some burritos for the weekend, and
that's going to work in any walk of life, right? You turn up with burritos.
In fact, I felt like I was one of the more famous or exciting people to see because I always had food with me, and everyone else was like, didn't really understand that we wouldn't have time to go get food. So we all lived off of jerky, oatmeal cream pies, and burritos for that first year. And
first two of those are quite hideous.
Yeah, and we can't eat them anymore. So so going into business together, year one is very light, but now we do officially do business together. So
and when you're saying you apply for permissions, is that from? Would there be one organization across a state, or is it park by park, or is it nationwide, or like who would those bodies be?
It varies. I mean, the US is incredibly fortunate that we have vast swaths of land that's public land, and it's owned by us, the American people, and it's managed in trust by various government agencies, but it's ours. And so the only thing that you have to do to put on a commercial event of our scale is simply get permission, because you're monetizing it. And so they want to have some restrictions in place to make sure the resource is protected. In the Western United States, the primary land groups that most people apply through are the United States Forest Service, which predominantly manages the mountainous region, and the Bureau of Land Management, which primarily manages grasslands and deserts. In our specific range, we're exclusively on United States Forest land, county land, and then we also lease some land from the state of Colorado to actually do our start and finish land. So we go through 3 permitting agencies, which is probably typical.
Average, yeah.
Because
there's different regions within the U.S. Forest Service, and so if you're in a big swath of land and crossing through different districts, essentially, then you would have to talk to all of those people, even though they're all one Forest Service, they're all kind of different entities.
So we use 2 forest districts, but we're only 3 miles in one, and we're 97 in the other. So it's pretty straightforward for us. But there, races like Hard Rock, for example, they go through 3 ranger districts, BLM, state, 4 towns. I mean, it's a permitting disaster for them, but they're good at it. So they've done it. But there's usually a couple I think everybody has to go through.
And do you think, because I was out in Colorado for Pikes Peak, and I was really I was blown away by the trail, actually, in that it's almost such a chiseled trail. The trail, it's really very specifically man-made design, and almost every rock is manicured. Do you think like those 150 limits that are typical, is that just a number that people have feels right, that now is established as 151 is going to destroy everything? Or is it actually a case you think that more than that is damaging to the type of terrain that races are typically on?
I think that probably varies. I'm sort of answering most of this because I do most of our permitting. So I sort of live in this world a lot. The United States average for 100-mile races on Forest Service land is actually about 300. And so I've used that data point to try to advocate our Forest Service for an additional 150 runners, because that would significantly ease lottery woes. But our forest is bordered to Leadville, which is the Lake Ranger District, and that is, or Lake County rather. And they've seen 1,000 runners on trails, and that scarred them to a pretty deep level. And so it's we're a low cap even by US standards. You look at a lot of the we always sort of bucket ourselves in just the Hard Rock qualifier, Western States qualifier zone, because that's the cleanest place for us to look. And if you look at most of those 100-milers, even in the Mountain West, most of them are in 200s to 400s pretty comfortably.
And is it the impact on the trail itself, or on wildlife, or on plants?
All of it.
It's everything. It's not just it's not just what you mentioned, it's also on other people.
Yeah.
It is public land and other people are going out there to have their own adventures and experiences. And so having events are disruptive to them. You've got county infrastructure that plays a role in this too. If you have hospitals, grocery stores, lodging, porta potties sometimes come up in these conversations where people are going to like defecate because we don't want people pooping in the woods. And in the US we have so much alpine, in the Saguache we have so much alpine terrain that if you did a solid waste defecation up there, it won't decompose for 40 or 50 years. And so there's all these random conversations. Yeah, and it varies by each district. And you've got some districts that are just completely cowboy and they do not give a shit what you do in there. And other districts like ours that are incredibly detail oriented and very precise, and they're having specialists and biologists doing reviews and inspections to make sure things are done more or less perfectly. But I don't think, a lot of trails are capable of handling high volume. They're built well. So it's not really the trail itself, I think, that comes into play the most.
No, and I would say if we did 300 versus 150 runners on that tread, I don't think you would notice a big difference unless there was some rain event that caused like higher risk. Like I don't think that the erosion to the tread is it. And honestly, when we bring in people, we do a lot of work on these trails. Like the number of hours Caleb spends clearing and maintaining, we have several work days. So like at the end of the day, if you were to look at like, well, what damage might we do versus what we're doing to improve the area, I think we could argue that we're doing more to improve, and more people probably engaged would improve the land more.
Yeah.
Very long-winded answer though to your question.
But I think the engagement piece, is really valid, because studies have shown that the more people are in touch with nature, then the more they care for it. And there's and does that then mean that because that must have a fundamental impact on the ability of companies to kind of thrive and grow and actually even be full-time businesses, because you're in essence limiting the amount of money one race can make to how much 150 people are willing to pay for a race, which hopefully is a fair bit, but hopefully people aren't being charged crazy amounts. So actually does that have a big impact then on the viability of races as businesses?
Oh yeah.
That I wish you had said that about 6 years ago.
I mean, we knew it. It's taken us a long time to get to green, right? And I think it opens up a whole nother conversation of what should races be charging, because I think we've heard it for ourselves. People complain about other races, but at the end of the day, like, one, don't we deserve a bit of minimum or a livable wage? And don't the people that we pay to do things, our photographers, the other people, shouldn't we pay them the right amount?
Yeah.
And we have to invest and build the infrastructure. We need tents. We need all of these things to put on this backcountry event. And so there is a price, and it's interesting to hear people complain about our price in particular, because we're like, we've just gotten to green in like the last 2 years. 2
years. Well, it wasn't even, because COVID fucked us.
Yeah. So like we're certainly not raking in money, and yes, it takes a long time to get to a place of viability. Essentially, we put a lot of our money down up front to like float the first 4 years.
And does that then mean, because there is, I wouldn't say there's a culture, but there's quite a few races in the UK, you turn up and they're pretty crappy, because you throw a few quid in, and you don't expect anything out. Whereas I guess does it then mean that because you're having to charge quite a bit, you then have to put on quite a bit, which means you then have to charge quite a bit more? Is that almost a trap in itself?
You have to find a balance. You certainly do, right? Like, we're not making all homemade foods, but we do have hot foods at most of our like aid stations, especially the night ones, which means multiple grills, multiple whatever, right? And so
we have live tracking, which costs, I think we put in $7,000 to $8,000 in equipment and supplies for like electronics and power generation and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and there's a lot of races in the US are still these like very basic races. And a lot of that is genuinely because they don't have the infrastructure to support them. I mean, the UK and a lot of Europe is fortunate, it's incredibly dense. And so there's a lot of structure and support in areas And
you can drive everywhere.
Yeah, and in the Western United States, you can still drive everywhere. It just takes 4 hours longer.
Yeah.
And so we've got, our immediate county is 20,000 people, and our towns are about 4,000 people apiece, and we're in a pretty populous county.
Comparatively.
I've run races in Idaho and Wyoming, where the biggest town was 400 people, and the closest hospital was 2 hours away. And so those races just can't bring in, especially in the beginning when they're growing, they can't bring in enough volunteers, they can't get enough runners, there's not enough Airbnbs or hotels or restaurants. And so there is a very, and I actually prefer this. I like this in the sport, that there's this very simple and no frills, rather basic race that you can find just about anywhere. And then there's middle tier of races. They're usually a little bit older, that have some infrastructure, they're closer to places, or they're more historic. And then you've got really big popular races that have massive support networks. And we're lucky to be one of those races, because we draw, I think this year we had 180 volunteers for 150 runners. I mean, that is incredible.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are they doing? That sounds desperately inefficient.
You're gonna have to come back out, David.
It varies a lot because of the distances too. Like Kelsey was saying, we do real foods at most of our aid stations. Our longest aid station is open for what's raspberry or blank. So they're about 24 hours open continuously.
Probably, yeah.
Wow, okay.
So you need multiple shifts. And I think this comes down to like, well, what is the race? What's the race culture? What is the race culture, right? And for us, it's like making sure our volunteers feel comfortable just as much as our runners. And so like we invest a lot of time and money in building out things so that when volunteers do come, like they're not up for 24 hours without getting a bite to eat, without being warm, like they deserve just as good of an experience as the runners. And that's where I think
we learned that the hard way the first 2 years. We people just give everything and were crushed for weeks after the race. They didn't even run, they just worked it.
I think that's the difference, right, with like a lot of the price points and the cultures. I mean, there's so many nuances behind the scenes that go into that I think you don't see as a runner. I never saw it. I didn't realize it until we started putting these on. You're like, oh, all these decisions, one, cost money, and two, have like a massive implication for how people experience or see the race. And so do you want to invest in that way? Like those are the discussions we have all the time of like, is that worth the spend? Is that worth our time to do?
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's your repeat customer versus having to market for every customer, right? Is getting that right. And then, because before we started recording, you did ask about whether there were many races in the UK that did lotteries, and where you had to get drawn. And actually, thinking about it, that's probably why, because the sizes aren't capped in the same way. And I assume it's because our trails they're just so worn in. You just.
Forget it.
They're just exactly. They're just massive scars, all their private land. But typically, they've been run for hundreds of years or walked for hundreds of years, and so so maybe I think not having that cap means that we don't necessarily have as many races that have limits. And without limits, then actually there is, in a good way, it's accessible for everyone. But we're still facing the challenge that accessible on paper doesn't mean accessible in practice. So when did you decide to, when did you first have to do a lottery, and when did you decide that you didn't want to just do it? Everyone has equal rights.
Well, we started off with 75 runners our first year, and we sold out in a couple months. And then next year we had 100 runners and we sold out in a couple weeks. And then the third year we had 125 runners and we sold out in 7 minutes. And because I thought it was hilarious, I did the registration opening at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Enjoyable for him, not for anyone else.
I don't even think I did it on a nice day. I think I just opened it on like a Thursday or something.
No,
that
you
mean
did it in
you-
the middle of the week. People couldn't sleep.
Yeah,
I mean, you had loads of Hawaiians signing up, thinking this is great.
yeah,
It's
well,
perfect time for
honestly,
me.
the West Coasters didn't have as big of a problem as, you know, the Europeans and the East Coasters. It was 3 a.m. for them, and we sold out in 7 minutes, and we had a wait list like 150 some deep in another 7 minutes, and we realized there, we're like, okay, this is, you know, we're not going to get many more runners, so this is probably close to our current cap, and obviously people are going to be benefiting from internet speeds here.
And out of interest, where do you think the difference in those, who were those people, the 75 difference between the 75 150, where do you think they came from? And like with each jump, what do you think's caused that?
We have a great race.
Yeah.
People want to run it.
Word just kept getting out.
Yeah. I mean, we were benefited in 2019 because we became a Hard Rock qualifier.
Nice. Yeah.
That's really helpful. But I mean, the race is in a place that's stunningly beautiful, that's close to Denver and the metropolises that have wonderful running communities. We always hired professional photographers to shoot it, and so people would see pictures and they looked good. You know, the picture itself was well done, and so the race was well done, and the runners did well, and it sort of just amplified on itself.
And I think there was a big need at that time. I think when we first started High Lonesome, there were far less hundreds than there are today in the US and especially in Colorado. And everyone was waiting in line for lotteries like Hard Rock and Western, and they wanted big mountain races that were a huge challenge and had a down home feel, and they weren't like these commercial events. And I think that we just ended up really timely essentially producing a product that people wanted.
Yeah. And that's still unique. I mean, there are 6, 7 more 100-milers since we started in Colorado, and none of them go above the tree line more than we do.
Yeah.
The ones that do are out and back spur courses that some people prefer, but many runners don't find as aesthetic or as interesting of lines. And so having, you know, a massive loop essentially that starts and finishes in the same place, that's organic and uncontrived and difficult but accessible, it was this just kind of perfect combo for a lot of people. You could do it as your first 100, or you could do it as your 15th, and you'd still find it challenging and you'd still find it accessible.
Caleb is a Caleb is a race developer wizard. Like, he's just very good at finding lines because he likes it.
I'm picky as shit.
And he's very picky and opinionated, which is what partly why he founded the race, like why this idea came up, because he wanted a race that he really wanted to run, and he was getting tired of seeing some of the things out there. So
and not to diss those races, plenty of people like that style. It's just that I didn't like that style, and I wanted something that I wanted to run.
I think out of back or loop for me would depend on what I was wanting at that time, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
I think different flavors. None of them are wrong.
Yeah. I think out and back for my first 100, I'd probably prefer an out and back, just because it's more ticking off the miles. It's you run. It feels like you're making gains more than the loop, where you're still just running to 100, aren't you? You're not running to 50 the same way.
Right.
And so then, at what point did you decide the lottery system wouldn't be just equal for everyone?
We talked about it before because we saw the lottery writing on the wall. But I don't.
Our 4th year, right?
Yeah.
So we put lottery in place for the 4th year.
Yeah, which we announced it in mid 2019.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I wish I remembered the exact conversation we had and when it was.
I think we had just been talking about, like, we had a lot of reticence about doing a lottery because we had seen how systems could be built and an inevitable bias would be built into them over time, just because, right, we can get into that more, but like, how do we essentially build this in a way to avoid as much inherent bias as we could, right? And we just didn't, it's really important to us to be equitable, not only gender-wise, but across the board. So
where were you thinking that the bias would naturally lean, or was in most of danger of leaning towards?
Well, towards Matin, right? Like, if you build a lottery that is based on certain points, like you get extra points for us, you get extra points for trail work or coming to volunteer or for being a reoccurring runner. And so right now at our time in ultra running history, if you look at even non-lotteried races, the breakdown of men versus women running 100 miles or distances longer than 50 miles, it's more men than women. So if we built a lottery that you got points for being a reoccurring runner, and we know that there's more men than women that run these races at this time, not necessarily because of what we're doing, but just because of society and culture. We're going to inherently continue to promote more men in running 100 milers or in our race because we're giving them more points, right? So
essentially the only way to mitigate any of the implicit biases that are going to be built into a lottery is to remove any form of control whatsoever and have a fully randomized entry process. So no qualification requirements whatsoever, because that skews entrance. No favoritism for previous applications, for previous finishes, for elites or not elites, gender.
Just nothing. You put your name in and it gets drawn.
Fully randomized.
One point per person.
And we didn't feel like that was the type of lottery we wanted. We did want qualifiers because we feel like that's necessary to make sure runners that are coming into the race are prepared and experienced enough to have a safe experience. We also like reoccurring runners coming back to a certain percentage because it helps continuity of culture stay in the sport and stay in our race specifically. And so we wanted to have some sort of reoccurring people to come back to build that culture and help maintain it. But we also knew that if we didn't have something that sort of checked how those, like Kelsey was saying, those reoccurring runners are being sort of picked or placed, we were going to just see a creep in the ratios going heavily and heavily or more men, because more men are finishing the race than women are finishing the race by virtue that more are starting the race than women are starting the race. So we just tossed out the idea, well, what if we split it? Like we could do it proportionally, we could do a straight split. And I think the straight split just it terrified me. Kelsey was more gung-ho. I was scared shitless.
We had to really ease you into that one.
I'm not because you
didn't believe it.
But because we're a young race. We're doing something no one's ever done. We're a 3-year-old race. Like, we're taking a huge fucking stand on something that some people are very, very vehemently against. And it was terrifying. But we
ended up we did a night, essentially like a brainstorming night. Like my job outside of putting on races with Caleb is in the consumer packaged goods industry. I work as a food scientist and business developer. And so I do a lot in innovation and like, how do we build products that people want, right?
I should have called you about a different stuff like that.
Happy to talk more about that. So we had a night where we invited like 15 people over from the community at large, like in the Front Range. And we were like, help us solve this problem. And it was before we decided 50-50 split is what we want to do. But right, if we're going to a lottery, how do we make sure that we build an equitable race? What are the problems that women are facing, that other groups are facing, to make sure that we have an equitable representation in our running field? And so we came up with a huge list of ideas, right? Like, could we provide childcare, more women representation at aid stations or in our leadership roles? How does the website look? What's our language that we're using? I mean, there's just a whole litany of things. But qualifier status. But at the end of the day, the biggest impact item in terms of making the lottery equitable came down to, we'll just make it 50-50. Like, just you get 50% of spots for men and 50% of women, because everything else you over time, right? Those are slow burn options. And we do some of them actually. It's not, we're not opposed to them, but we didn't want the lottery to get out of hand. So
we can't solve society, and we can't solve systemic issues on our own. And so if we had sat around and said, well, we've identified all these long-term systemic issues that we know are affecting women and their participation in running, and since we can't control them, we're going to just do a little bit we can to make it a little better. And we just have to wait to see society evolve over the course of a fucking century to get better. And instead we were like, well, screw that. Like, what can we control? We can control our race, and we're going to do what we want the sport to look like now. And it's easy to do now because we're starting from ground zero. So there was no baggage. We could start fresh and clean and have a really good system from the beginning.
And in terms of the applications of previous year, because you mentioned there was sold out in 7 minutes. There was a wait list of another 150. How many women had actually registered interest in the previous year? Did you know that you had 75 applications coming into it, that you're like, it's fine if we put 75 spots down, they'll go? Or was there a risk that you're going to be like, oh shit, sorry guys, actually we need money, so you can all come and join?
Yeah.
Oh, poignant question.
Yeah, it's a good question. We did run that risk. We had at the maximum registration, so immediately after registration and the wait list, like that day, essentially, we had, I think it was like just under 70 women.
You're talking about the first year of the lottery?
In 2019.
But what was it before those years?
It was about like 22%.
20% of people signing up were women.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when we looked at the first year of the lottery had 125 cap. So it was split 60 to 67. And our lottery documentation is pretty extensive and it goes into this sort of thing. So whichever pool is larger, if we have an uneven number of spots, since 125 doesn't divide evenly, the larger pool gets the extra spot. If one of the pools fails to fill, the extra spots go to the pool that didn't fill. If that pool, if both pools are like, basically we didn't have enough applicants to even fill all of our spots, then it goes to open registration. Like we sort of tried to like cover our bases here in case everybody hated it and didn't apply.
Yeah.
But we had was it 92 women apply the first year for 60 some spots.
Yeah, so it turned out well, but it was a risk that we were worried that we would do this and then not enough women would show up, and then people who were saying that women aren't interested in running hundreds or women don't like these challenges in the same way as men would be kind of validated, but it hasn't. We know that's not the case, right? But still people showing up matters. Even if they didn't, wouldn't think that was still true, but we just didn't want to give more. Yeah. It was nerve-wracking, right? To give people an opportunity to really come down on us should it not work the way we thought it would.
And with those 92, was that because of word of mouth about the policy, or do you think it?
Somewhat. I mean, the policy definitely affected some registration because people will tell us that they've signed up because of it.
Yeah. It had to have, because it was a big jump. So I think that, and just again being in another, we spend a lot of time. Community is really important to us. And so I think spending the time that we have investing in our community here and in like the Front Range, which is just a few hours away, I think that's also been, I don't know what percentage of what, right, has brought in more women, but I think all of it plays a big role.
I think if I was a female, if I had a choice between a race that had positive discrimination in this way and one that didn't, I'd want to almost reward the one that had put this policy in place. I'd improve my chances, but also you're almost saying, hey, thanks for actually doing this. And hopefully an added benefit that it will be a slightly different culture towards more suiting. And what kind of knock-on effect has that had on, because you mentioned that you wanted to ensure some continuity of previous years. You wanted to ensure that the fast runners have come back, that people have got experience. And I think that is right for 100 miler. You'll ensure that places are going to people who genuinely stand a chance finishing. Did it have any negative impact on those buckets of people?
The number of repeat runners did go down because the lottery, I like math, so there's a bell curve.
Yeah.
And your first finish is worth some, your middle two are worth the most, and then it diminishes and drops off again. That way there's sort of this like limit to how many boosts you get.
Yeah,
so that person who's run 10 times, you're not getting these insane odds because you've already had the benefit of running 10 times. And so there's a increasing and then diminishing returns at a certain point. And the fact that many people wanted to run just meant that there was there's more competition for fewer spots in a way. But
I don't think we saw.
There's no change of culture.
There's no change of culture, and I don't think nobody was coming to us being like, I'm done being a reoccurring runner.
Well, one person.
Maybe one. Okay. Like one out of, hundreds, right? We, of course, you always upset somebody, but nobody was like, how dare you? I mean, men stand behind this just as strongly as women do. And I think we even heard that this year our runners, like when we were out there on the course, like, oh my gosh, look at how many women are here. Like, not only do I feel more competitive, but like, this feels awesome. And that was a sentiment echoed by both genders, right? It didn't matter.
Yeah.
It was really fun, I think, for everyone to see this more equitable field.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a common misperception that the only people who really support these kind of policies are women, and that's bullshit, because there's a shit ton of men in the sport who are passionate about equity. And a lot of them are friends or partners to, or married to strong, independent women, and they want to see those people succeed and have benefits and opportunities too. And so I think, to your point, I think some women definitely pick us out because of the policies that we have. And I think some men do the same.
Yeah.
I think men genuinely find, even though that they're, you can look at it in a somewhat negative light and say, oh, my odds are less now as a man to get into this race. Mathematically, that's accurate. But I don't think a lot of the people who are in that spot look at that as a problem. They see that as just an opportunity cost. In order for us to move the needle, they have a slightly less benefit. And if they want that benefit, they can go to just about any other race in the sport and have all the benefits of being a traditional white man in America and have all the perks.
Have you seen an increase in applicants from creepy dudes?
From creepy dudes?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Oh, like because there's more women here. Oh, that's so gross, David. No, we don't have on our like registration, are you a creepy dude? So it's been hard to track that.
We should come up with some question that only creepy dudes would answer creepily, and try, but it's subtle enough.
I can help you with that.
I think the creepy dudes know that this race is put on by two very outspoken individuals, that if you showed up creepily to our race, you'd immediately get kicked out. We have a zero tolerance policy for creepiness, male or female. So no, they haven't shown up, and they make a lot of comments online, and they also don't like my responses or Caleb's responses. So they just don't come. Yeah, it's good for everyone that way.
And what do you think? Like, do you think it has had an actual impact on the wider community, or do you think it's more that it's been a magnet for women to come to your races than to other races?
This is hard to quantify. So to qualify probably both of our responses, this is our perceptions.
Yeah.
I think it has had an impact in the broader sport. We hear it talked about more and more. We see our name coming up more and more when people are criticizing other races, which has benefits, but we don't always love the way the criticism is being phrased or done. But it's nice to know that there is at least
create a standard, sort of, or something to a goal.
I think it's like a feasibility test.
Yeah,
like we're showing proof of concept here.
Yeah,
like, you can do this if you want, and it's not the right fit for everybody, and we don't think that
there's not the one answer of doing the lottery this way. There's a lot of ways to like improve diversity, but
most races in America are also not lotteries. And so our method of making a lottery that's split equitably doesn't apply to a race that's not selling out. It's not going to work. It doesn't matter. So I think it has made a difference. I think we've also, we see it intimately in our own race pretty significantly. We have people who come out to volunteer just because we do this. We have people who, when they don't get in, they come out and volunteer because they want to get in next year, and they want to be a part of the race still, and they want to see that success. We've had sponsors seek us out because of what we do. We've had races, previous sponsors who sponsored races that left because of gender issues and sought us out because of our progressiveness here.
I think it started a conversation, or given more fire to the conversation. It was a conversation that was going on before us. Like, we're not the founders of that. And then I think the other thing too that I'm excited about, and it's just too early, but look, we have more women running 100-milers. We have more women putting in for our race. Therefore, we're going to have more women finishers. And that's going to have a snowballing effect, because that's going to encourage more women, whether it's our race or someone else's, to start getting into the sport, because it's, again, a proven concept. Oh yeah, women are just as capable of running 100-milers. We knew this, but look at this obvious example, I guess I'm going to go sign up for a 100-miler too. Let me go give it a try, right? So I think that as the years go on, like our hope with this policy as well is that it's just going to get more engagement, regardless of if it's our race or not.
And what would you say the kind of notable impact has been on culture, or in ways that you maybe haven't expected that could be hopefully for the better, but maybe some that actually turn out to be a bit annoying?
I can speak to the annoying one.
Probably more toilets for one.
Actually, yes. I adore this race, and there's so many things about it that I want to talk about, and I talk the most about gender equity, and that's important, and I love talking about it, and we love talking about it and being in this position. But there is an element of sort of almost like soapbox pigeonholing ourselves here, where we're the race that's really stoked on this one thing, and that's all we do and all we talk about. And it's, if you come to the race, you realize, like, in race week, this rarely gets commented on, except from just commenting on the proportions and just being like, oh wow, we got some fast females, we got some fast dudes, oh, there's so many women this year, it's great, that kind of thing. But like, once the race is going on, like the race is just incredible on all of these elements. And so I think it's just fun to see people at the race, because they get, if they've never seen us before except these podcasts or posts or blogs, like they see right away that there's a lot of depth to the race beyond just this one part. And that's all due to the community, which is itself varied and diverse and wonderful to be a part of.
And in terms of, because obviously gender equality is important, but equally there's probably more obstacles to disadvantaged backgrounds, people of color, and it's slightly harder to give a percentage of places to those individuals, and actually the obstacles probably aren't as much getting a place as potentially economic. But have you come under criticism for for making the draw just down one line and not across other lines as well?
Yeah, and it's not an invalid criticism, because
no, it's fair.
As you pointed out, there are many places that need support, and this is simply the biggest bucket that we had access to. I mean, you know, what is it, 2% of the world identifies as non-binary or something other, and 98% of the world identifies as male or female. And so if we're going to split the bucket, the biggest buckets we're going to get are these two buckets. And we put in a transgender and non-binary policy to make sure that the 2% didn't get left behind, and they got to come along too. And
we do things throughout our race to try and, make sure that we're making people feel seen for who they are, right? But I think, going back to your question, it's just there's only so much we can do. We're a two-person show, and it's his primary gig, and it's not, I hate to say this, right, but it's just putting context. Is it's his primary gig, my part-time gig. We're trying to tackle as much as we can, but we're also a small business, and there's only so much we can do at once with just the two of us. So but it doesn't mean it's any less important. It's just we keep trying to tackle the biggest things first.
And I think, we still try to mitigate where we can on case-by-case basis or other opportunities as they arise. And so we have kind of like a revolving pool of not only scholarship money, but if someone reaches out and they're like, hey, I really want to run a race, but it's just too expensive, what can I do? We're like, hey, what can you do? We'll figure out the rest, kind of thing. And so, we try to do that to mitigate economic issues. We've given spots away to BIPOC running groups to give away. We've done it for Indigenous groups. We've done it for Black groups, Latino groups. And basically what we've realized is, we aren't experts in that space. In fact, we barely touch those spaces. So we're ignorant as shit here. And so if someone comes up to us and they're like, I'd like to do this, can you help me? We almost never say no. We always find a way to do something. But finding those groups and finding people who want to do something with us is oftentimes the biggest challenge. And so that I think is where the sport itself can really benefit from just working together. I mean, there are certain races that take place in states and counties that are predominantly Black. They're going to have massively more opportunities to bring in Black people and Black culture and speak to Black backgrounds than we possibly could in a state that's 2%, 5% Black and 30% Latino. Other states have 0 Latinos. We have 30%. We could work there. You know, indigenous places in general, if you're closer to a reservation or not. And so it would be sweet to see a lot of races sort of cherry pick opportunities based on their communities around them and say, what am I suited to here? Oh, I can really work with inner city stuff. Oh, I can really work with rural people. Oh, I can, you know, and just tailor their race to pick one thing or maybe two and just charge on that and see what you can get done.
And from the differences you've noticed in provisions and changes from now to 4 years prior when it was more male, what advice would you give to other race organizers on what you think has been essential in making a race more appealing and also given the support needed for more female runners?
I think there's baseline things that every race should be doing. Looking at their leadership team and who's on it, making sure you have equitable spots for men, women, BIPOC groups, just diverse, make it a diverse group, right?
No creepy dudes.
What?
No creepy dudes.
No creepy dudes, they're out. And that's both like in like the background organizing team and also who you see come race day, right? Because that's important, like that you have captains that are leading these on the ground teams that there's differences everywhere. So in leadership, in race policies, so we've got a pregnancy or new child is really what we call it, policy, which applies to families regardless of gender, if they've birthed a child, if they've adopted a child, like make it an encompassing policy. Because I think that's actually one of the things that has really made a difference on who's showing up to our race. And they're easy to do. I mean, it's not hard to put these, it's not a big lottery thing that you have to do. You can put that in place. Same with our transgender and non-binary policy. Those are very easy to do. Essentially, it's making a statement to your community that like, this is what we stand for, and we're putting our money where our mouth is and how it's going to interact, how we'll interact with you in your life, right? So those things, the language and the images races use on their websites and in advertising. So making sure there's diverse images of people there. And then it starts getting down. I mean, I think those are like the 3 baseline things that I think everyone should be doing. And then after that,
qualifiers I would add in there.
Qualifiers maybe.
If you're in a 100-mile space, you typically have qualifiers, making sure the qualifiers aren't discriminating against certain groups, certain genders is going to make your race more accessible. So I think those 4 probably would be the big buckets.
And then after that, I think it gets very race specific, right? And that's where you've heard Caleb say, look, like, we're really proud of our lottery, but it doesn't apply to everyone. Not everyone can do this. There's plenty of races that just, you would have a revolt, really, I think, and you'd alienate too many people within your community by doing that. And so, but you could do other things, like what are your cutoffs doing? What are the other things that you've built within your community that are supporting? If you can't do a lottery, like, can you do other things to support? Like, again, is there some outreach that you could do for specific interest groups to like encourage that relationship?
I mean, there's really small ones, like having pads and tampons at aid stations.
Pads and tampons,
having bathrooms where people can safely use a restroom is fine. Not
having space for breastfeeding or changing. People would like some privacy, right?
Making sure people can get pacers in spots, like for beginners that want to have pacers in difficult spots, you make sure that they can get a crew person in and run through the dangerous spots with a friend or somebody, so they're safer. I mean, there's lots of little stuff
that are specific.
It
just really depends on the race itself, but I think it just requires taking a step back and people looking at their event and going, well, where are our like choke points or gaps? right? Because it's very personal for each race, depending on where they're putting it on.
Yeah. And I think this is sort of more of an interjection, but it touches on your question. So forgive me for a bit of a segue here. But we are the owners and faces of the race, but we have a leadership team of 9 directors. We're both a director. And so there's 7 other directors, 24 aid station captains and co-captains, which are the people that actually manage the individual spots where we have aid stations. And so we have a team of about 30 people that are putting this race on. And, you know, like Kelsey said, we have a diverse team. We've got more women on our director roles than men. We've got a female course director, which is one of the few in the nation. Our medical directors are both female doctors that are nationally renowned. We've got every aid station captain has done a 100-miler. Like, there's a lot of things in there, and those people bring stuff to us. They see something and they're like, hey, we could do this, let's do that. And you're like, great, done, let's do it. You don't have
listening to your people. Yeah, it's
like,
not, it's our race, but it's not like, no, we very much,
you know. And so our medical directors, I remember at one point made a tweak to one of our medical policies because of our transgender policy, because they wanted to make it more I think it was outdated, and they were like, hey, we're going to fix this. Is that okay? Like, yeah, please, by all means, fix this. And then one year, Kelsey was like, we're putting tampons at all aid stations. And I was great. I didn't know we didn't have them or we needed to. It's just like, there's so many things like that that are obvious once you do them, but if somebody points them out, you get to them sooner.
And also, having that many staff means you do see a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And picking the right people, right? I think we've just been really fortunate to have an incredible group of people that like are just as passionate about everyone's experience, and that's from volunteer to runner. And we've created a culture of like, please tell us, we'll do that. Like, tell us what we're missing. That it's just, you're laughing because you're thinking of examples.
Well, I just thinking about, like, we do a runner survey after the races. Like every race we send them out. We actually have to send ours out. We've delayed them for no reason. But yeah, sometimes we our open door policy gets us some really interesting feedback that aren't particularly useful, but we get a lot of good stuff.
The creepy dude again.
Here's an obvious one that I think is hilarious. We have predominantly green pine trees, and we use red course markings. And 2 years ago, we had a red-green colorblind runner, so they couldn't see any of our course markings. And they were like, "Hey guys, you might want to maybe change those when you get a chance." And we were like, "Oh shit."
Yeah, I mean, you just wouldn't consider that, would you? Unless.
No. And so we like sent out some surveys to some blind and vision impaired runners we know, and we're like, what color would you prefer to see? And we got like 2 back, and we're changing our course markings this year for that. And then, like, I never thought I'd deal with colors on course markings that way.
Yeah. We do our best, but we don't.
And have people from big races been in touch? Do you get a sense? Sorry, no, the big race is the wrong word. I don't mean to say that as if yours isn't a big.
That's right. We're just so piddly cheating.
But in terms of, I mean, we've already discussed UTM bastards already. And there are other organizations, as you say, that are trapped in their, almost trapped by their community, probably wouldn't allow them to take too big a step in this direction. But do you get a sense that your race policy is being noted and almost watched from afar with eager eyes?
Yeah.
Well, I can't speak for the eagerness of the eyes, but it's being watched.
It's being watched. Yeah, I think we get a lot of conversations in the background, big race or not, of people reaching out to us about all of our policies to understand, like, how did it go? Can I borrow this? Can I use this language? We freely want people to, if they think it will fit for them, that's great. But yeah, I think it's definitely, I mean, look, you've seen changes in the Hard Rocker lottery in the last couple of years. That conversation is still ongoing. We see a lot of people still talking about it. Western states. Yeah, I think it's certainly, look, we've stuck our neck out there, right? And people, I think, mostly respect it and are trying to figure out how they also can be a part of improving the community. Because at the end of the day, all of the races are, I think everyone pretty much means well, besides maybe
there's a handful of
shitheads we won't name. And everyone wants to do better, and everyone's just trying to figure out what their role is and how much they can move that needle, right?
And
Amazing.
I think too, we've been benefited by a lot of the races we just talked about. I mean, Hard Rock was massively instrumental in helping us in our early days. And we used their lottery as sort of an example of things we didn't really want to emulate. But we were able to take advantage of them being in the learning seat for 10 years on their own and learn from them. And then they in turn reached out to us after they were going to make some changes and picked our brains, and they did what they can do, and other races are doing what they can do. And so long as people are talking about it, we're going somewhere, because the solutions can vary and should vary, frankly. And so it'll be interesting to see. We took our transgender policy from Western states, and then Western states changed their pregnancy policy after we had made ours a little looser. I don't think they did it because of us, but now there's more races that are doing it. And UTMB took a shit ton of shit over their pregnancy policy, and hopefully now they're going to make.
Do they have one?
I think they had one, but
don't they have a secret one? What is it?
Something like that.
Yeah, they say prize money and pregnancy policy were both in the rules this year without announcements. So which is good, I guess. But no announcement in a way shows they know they were in the wrong the whole time and didn't want to draw any light on that. But well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Is there anything else you think would be useful to kind of share for other race organizers, or any other shout outs or promotion you'd like to do?
Lottery opens on January 2nd. So if you're interested in running, put your name in.
Or come out and volunteer if you just want to see what it's about. And
we've only had a few British runners. We'd love a few more.
There you go, D-Bad, as you've heard it. And we have quite a few American listeners as well. So hopefully some of them will sign up too. And next time I'm out, if I assume we'll be going out to Pikes Peak next year for the race, I'll give you a shout if we are. But if not, next time I'm that way, I will give you a shout and we can go and see some of the trail.
You should come stay. Race week gets to be busy, but other than that, we've got a guest room that's open to whatever runners in the area, so you're always welcome to come stay. And likewise, if you ever pass through London, let me know. I will take you out and about.
Sounds good.
Thank you, David.
Cheers, guys. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers.
So there you go, D-Badis. Really love that, actually. Really love that, because we're still discovering, as a podcast, certain topics that we haven't discussed before that may have been discussed in every other podcast. But as I said previously, we haven't really talked to any race organizers in America. And it's through my trip to Pikes Peak and to Flagstaff, I've got a bit more of a sense of some of the American trail culture. But I've always thought that it's amazed me how expensive and small American races are. And now clearly because of the rules on how many people are allowed to actually race, which in some ways is great because it means you're going to have loads and loads of races, but it does, as they can attest, make it hard for people to actually make a living out of it. And there is a certain level of stability that races need to have continuity. And so hopefully it won't affect American races where ultras have sprung up hugely in the last 10 years. Hopefully the fact that it is so hard to actually be financially viable won't damage the progression of those runs for years and years and years. But thanks for listening, guys. Really enjoyed that episode. If you'd liked that one, I'm trying to think of other good episodes that are similar themed or similar topics. We spoke to Safe Power a few weeks ago about She Runs, which is an organization they've set up to try and educate and enable racers to be able to position themselves correctly and also provide the right sort of provisions to encourage as many females to be running. In terms of race organizers, we have spoken to quite a few. We've spoken to Mark Still, who does some incredibly hard races in the north of England, organises those. We've spoken to Jim Mee, who does a lot of international races. Steve Didericht, who organises the British contingent for the Marathon des Sables. Marathon Sables. So all of those are really good ones to listen to. If there are any topics you'd like us to discuss in the future, then do let us know, or any people you'd like me to interview, then message me, David at Bad Boy Running. And we always ask for a keyword to be left in the reviews, something fun to try and sneak in there. What would the one be this time? Creepy dude. So if you're going to leave us a review, please put creepy dude. I can see where this is going to go. This is going to come right back on my face, isn't it? But thanks for listening, guys. Please do subscribe. Tell your friends, yada, yada, yada. And we'll see you next time. Bye, 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 bye.
Fuck you, buddy.